Elon Musk was attending a public event, mingling with investors and giving brief interviews when a voice broke through the noise. "Please, sir, can you help me?" The woman's voice trembled with desperation. She was a homeless mother, standing just a few feet away, with a child clinging to her side. Her clothes were ragged, and her eyes, filled with a mix of exhaustion and hope, locked onto Musk as though he was her last hope. Musk stopped in his tracks, a stunned silence falling over the group around him. The sight of her, standing there in front of him with a pleading look in her eyes, felt out of place in the polished world of the elite investors and businessmen surrounding him. They all seemed to step back, some even giving the mother a quick glance before turning away. The moment was surreal. The woman was different, not someone with a proposal or a pitch, but someone whose plea came straight from the heart. "Please," she repeated, taking a step forward, her voice wavering. "I have no job. I'm living on the streets with my children. We don't have enough food, and I don't know where we're going to sleep tonight. I just need a little help. Anything." Musk's mind was racing. His hands instinctively shifted in his pockets, but the world around him seemed to slow down. He had been approached by countless people before, whether asking for a favor or seeking investment, but never like this. He had built companies, created technological marvels, and achieved things that most people could only dream of, but in this moment, none of that seemed to matter. He couldn't help but wonder, why had this mother come to him? He was no expert in charity, no philanthropist in the traditional sense, and yet, there she was, asking for help from someone who could easily ignore her in the sea of people. For a moment, Musk stood frozen. His gaze flickered back to the group of investors, their eyes fixed on him now. What would they think if he stepped away from the crowd to address this? Could he offer anything that would actually make a difference? His reputation, his wealth, what was it all worth if it didn't help people like this? The mother's eyes were full of a mixture of hope and disbelief. She hadn't expected to find a savior, just someone who could make life a little easier, just someone who would acknowledge her presence. Yet, here was Elon Musk, staring at her, his expression unreadable. The crowd stood silently behind them, some observing, others shifting uncomfortably, unsure of how to react. Musk finally spoke, though his voice was quieter than he intended. I don't know how to help you, but I'm listening." It wasn't much, but it was all he could offer at that moment. His heart was heavy with the weight of her situation, but he didn't know where to begin. He was a man who built rockets, but he didn't have a plan to solve something so deeply human. The woman's face softened, her breath catching in her throat. "I don't need a lot. Just something for my children. They're cold, they're hungry. We're just trying to survive." Musk's mind whirled as he processed her words. The ache in her voice cut deeper than anything he had encountered in his business ventures. How could someone be living like this? He had seen poverty before, he had read about it, heard stories, but standing there, hearing it firsthand, was a different experience entirely. His mind was filled with questions. Should he just give her some money? Or was that not enough? Was this a one-time solution? Would it really make a difference? The mother's tears began to well up, though she quickly wiped them away, unwilling to show more weakness. Musk couldn't shake the image of her small children clinging to her side, unsure of what the future held, uncertain if tomorrow would bring food or shelter. It was a humbling moment for him, one that made everything he had built, his cars, his rockets, his wealth, seem like nothing in comparison to the basic human need for security and care. "Let me talk to you for a moment," Musk said, his voice filled with a sudden sense of determination. He gestured for her to follow him, stepping away from the crowd, into a quieter corner of the event. The mother hesitated for a moment, unsure if she had heard him correctly. The crowd behind them seemed to buzz with gossip, but Musk didn't care. He had to make this right. "Listen," Musk continued, once they were out of earshot. "I can't imagine what you've been through. But I'll help. I don't know exactly how yet, but I'll help." His words felt weighty, as if they carried more meaning than just an offer of money. This wasn't about his usual philanthropy, or offering a quick fix. It was about understanding that the issue of homelessness wasn't just about survival, it was about dignity. The mother stared at him in disbelief, not sure if she had heard him right. For someone like Musk to even acknowledge her plight, it was more than she had hoped for. The weight of his words began to sink in, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. As the conversation continued, Musk began to think beyond the moment. He realized that this wasn't an isolated incident, there were countless families in similar situations. People were struggling, but it wasn't just about giving a handout, it was about creating a system that could help people rebuild their lives. Musk knew that this was a pivotal moment for him, one that could redefine his approach to his fortune. The mother wasn't asking for the moon, she was asking for a chance to provide for her children. And as Musk listened, he began to understand that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. He didn't know what it would look like yet, but he knew one thing: this moment, this encounter, would change everything. This was no longer just about one person in need, it was about changing the way society looked at poverty, homelessness, and how they could come together to solve these issues. The homeless mother's name was never important to anyone who met her. She was simply another face in the crowd, someone who blended into the background, forgotten and ignored by most. Yet to her children, she was everything. A mother who worked tirelessly to protect them, even when there was no safety net to catch her. The day she approached Elon Musk was one of the most desperate of her life, but it was also the start of a new path, one she never expected. She had always been a survivor. Her journey from a stable home to the streets had been long and painful, filled with uncertainty and hopelessness. She once had a decent job and a small apartment to call home. But a series of misfortunes, a job loss, a health scare, and mounting bills, had slowly chipped away at everything she had built. She had no family to turn to, no support network, and no friends who could help her in her time of need. Her children, two young ones, ages 7 and 5, had never known a life of stability. They had known hunger, cold nights, and the uncertainty that came with being homeless. They moved from shelter to shelter, from one temporary solution to the next, hoping each time that things would get better. But the cycle never seemed to break. Every day, the mother's thoughts were consumed with one question: how can I give them a better life? Her attempts to find work were futile. She applied for jobs constantly but was either rejected or ignored. She wasn't just a mother trying to make ends meet, she was a homeless woman with children. And in the eyes of many, that was all she would ever be. People looked away, some out of pity, others out of fear or judgment. She was invisible in a world that had no place for people like her. But despite the hardships, she fought for her children. Each day, she tried to keep their spirits up, even when her own were at rock bottom. They deserved a chance, a future where they could dream, go to school, and have a warm bed to sleep in. When she first saw Elon Musk at the public event, she hadn't intended to approach him. She was just another face in the crowd, trying to gather the courage to ask for help. But something about his presence, his success, made her wonder, could he be the one to help me? She had heard stories of successful people giving back, of making a difference in the world. She had seen the work Musk had done with his companies, creating electric cars, innovating space travel, and thought that maybe, just maybe, he was the kind of person who could change the lives of people like her. She didn't know what else to do. She didn't have the luxury of time or pride, she just needed help. As she approached him, her heart raced. She had always been a proud woman, and asking for help had never been easy. But the fear of what would happen if she didn't take this chance outweighed everything else. She had to ask. She had to speak up. The moment she spoke those words, "Please, sir, can you help me?" it was as though time stopped. Her voice shook with a mixture of fear and hope. She knew she wasn't the only one in the world struggling, but in that moment, it felt like Musk was the only one who could help her. She didn't ask for much. Just a chance to provide for her children. To keep them safe. To give them something more than what she had experienced. Musk's reaction was immediate. His surprise was evident, but so was the recognition in his eyes. He had seen the struggles of others before, through news stories, interviews, and even his own charitable contributions. But standing there, face to face with this woman, something felt different. Her eyes, filled with desperation, locked with his, and he couldn't look away. What struck him the most wasn't the state she was in, her ragged clothes, her weary face, the way her children clung to her as if she were their only lifeline. It was the courage in her voice. The fact that she had come to him, knowing that he might have the power to change her family's future. The raw, vulnerable truth in her plea hit him harder than any pitch or request for a donation ever could. Musk had been accustomed to people asking him for things, whether it was support for an idea or a cause, or even a simple favor. But this was different. The mother wasn't asking for a handout. She wasn't trying to sell him a dream or a product. She was just asking for help. And as he stood there, processing her request, Musk realized that he was at a crossroads. This wasn't just a random moment, it was a test of his own values, his own sense of responsibility. Her words lingered in his mind long after the conversation ended. "I just need a little help. Anything." The simplicity of the request was overwhelming. She didn't ask for money, for shelter, or for anything extravagant. She just wanted a chance. A chance for her children to have something more. And Musk realized that maybe he had been too focused on big ideas, grand visions, and futuristic plans. Maybe the answer wasn't always about solving complex problems, it was about addressing the human need right in front of him. As he looked at the mother and her children, a sense of guilt washed over him. He had so much. And yet, here was a woman who had nothing but her love for her children and the hope that someone would listen. Musk knew then that he couldn't just walk away. This was his chance to make a real difference. And in that moment, something in his heart shifted. It wasn't about technology. It wasn't about the future. It was about humanity. The mother's words had cut through the noise of his everyday life. They had made him think in a way he hadn't before. And with that realization, Musk knew he had to act. Not just for her, but for everyone like her, the ones who had fallen through the cracks, the ones who needed someone to step up. The journey had just begun, and Musk wasn't sure what it would look like. But he knew one thing, he couldn't ignore the plea any longer. And he wouldn't. Elon Musk stood there, stunned, as the mother's plea echoed in his mind. He hadn't expected something like this today. At a high-profile event with the world watching, how could he respond to someone in such desperate need? His life had been built on extraordinary achievements, innovations, and the pursuit of ambitious goals. Yet, in this moment, none of those things felt as significant as the woman standing before him. He had spent years working on creating products that promised to change the world. Rockets to reach Mars, electric vehicles to reduce emissions, and technologies that pushed the boundaries of human potential. But this was different. This wasn't about technology or the future of humanity. This was about one person, one family, struggling to survive in a world that seemed to have forgotten them. As the mother waited for his response, her tired eyes looking at him with a mixture of hope and fear, Musk realized he didn't know what to say. He had never been faced with something so raw and personal. What was the right thing to do? What could he possibly offer that would be enough? Was giving money enough? Was there something more meaningful he could do? The complexity of the situation was overwhelming. He instinctively turned to the crowd behind them. The investors and business leaders who had been around him, their faces now showing curiosity, some even slight discomfort. They, too, were unsure how to react. They had all heard the pleas of the less fortunate before, but this was different. This wasn't a charity gala or a corporate social responsibility initiative, it was real. It was right in front of them. And there was no avoiding it. Musk's mind raced as he tried to reconcile his role as a businessman, a visionary, and a public figure with his growing desire to help. He had seen the reports about homelessness, the poverty that plagued so many communities, but he had never been this close to it. The disconnect was suddenly glaring, and it made him question the work he had been doing for so long. Was he really making the kind of difference that mattered? Or was he just building things for people who didn't need anything? Was his success a means to just satisfy his own ambition, or was it something more? Turning back to the mother, Musk found himself at a crossroads. He had all the resources he could ever need, and yet, in that moment, he felt helpless. His wealth, his companies, none of it seemed to matter in the face of such real and urgent need. He wasn't a social worker. He wasn't trained to deal with homelessness, nor did he have the expertise to provide immediate solutions. What he did have, however, was the power to change things. He had the resources, the influence, and the platform to help in ways most people could only dream of. But how? I don't know what to say, Musk admitted, his voice quiet but genuine. But I can listen, and I can try to help. I won't turn my back on you. I promise. The mother looked at him, her face softening, her guard lowering slightly as she processed his words. I don't want to be a burden, she said softly, looking down at the ground. I just want to give my children a chance. Musk could feel the weight of her words. A chance. That was all she was asking for. Just a shot at a better life. And somehow, that felt even more overwhelming than the complex problems Musk had tackled in his career. This wasn't about designing a new product or exploring new frontiers, it was about a human connection, a person who needed help, and the question of whether he, with all his power, could make a real difference. For a long moment, Musk didn't speak. He watched as the woman's eyes welled up with tears, her tired hands gripping her children a little tighter. She had been through so much. She had been forced to survive in a system that didn't support her, that didn't offer her a way out. And now she was standing before him, asking for help, help that she wasn't sure would ever come. Musk felt a sense of urgency flood over him. This wasn't something that could be solved with a quick fix or a small donation. It was a systemic issue, a deep-rooted problem that affected millions of people every day. And if there was one thing Musk had learned from building his companies, it was that no problem was unsolvable if you approached it with the right mindset and resources. I want to do something bigger, Musk said finally, his voice steadier now. Not just for you, but for everyone in your situation. I can't just give you money and send you on your way. I want to help change the system that left you here in the first place. I want to create something that can help more people like you. The mother's eyes widened slightly as she took in his words. She hadn't expected this, she had come to him asking for a small favor, something to ease her family's immediate pain. But Musk's words promised something much larger. She wasn't sure if she could believe it yet, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel a spark of hope. Musk continued, feeling the weight of the moment. I don't know exactly what it will look like yet, but I'm committed to finding a way to make things better, not just for you, but for so many others. And I'll start by helping you today. We'll find a place for you and your children to stay. But more than that, I want to help create something that lasts. A system that gives people a chance to rebuild, not just survive. The mother nodded slowly, her tears now streaming down her face. It wasn't just about getting help, it was about the promise that someone, for once, was listening. Someone with power, someone who could make a real difference, had heard her plea. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, she felt seen. She felt understood. Musk stood there, watching the mother and her children, his heart heavy but his mind resolute. He knew this wouldn't be easy. He knew that changing the world wasn't something that happened overnight. But in that moment, he made a promise to himself: he wouldn't just be a bystander to the world's suffering. He would do what he could to make it better. And this was only the beginning. In the days that followed his encounter with the homeless mother, Elon Musk found himself consumed by the promise he had made. It wasn't just a fleeting moment or a charitable act to check off a box, it had become a calling, an urgent responsibility that weighed heavily on him. He had seen firsthand the devastating effects of homelessness, the struggle that countless families faced daily, and he knew he couldn't just walk away. Musk was a man known for his ability to solve complex problems, to innovate in ways that others could only dream of. He had built rockets that soared into space, electric cars that were revolutionizing transportation, and technologies that challenged the very foundations of how people lived and worked. But now, he was faced with something different. A problem that couldn't be solved with just technology or money. It was about people, about real lives, and how he could make a tangible difference. He spent long hours brainstorming ideas, talking to his advisors, and reaching out to experts in fields ranging from social work to urban development. He knew that simply offering a temporary solution wasn't enough. The problem of homelessness was not a quick fix, it required a long-term, sustainable approach. And that meant more than just providing shelter. It meant addressing the root causes of homelessness, like poverty, lack of affordable housing, mental health issues, and unemployment. Musk knew he had the resources to create a meaningful impact. He had built companies that transformed entire industries, and he understood how to mobilize people and resources toward a common goal. But this wasn't just about making a difference for one person or one family. It was about creating a model that could be replicated across the world, a blueprint for how society could help those who had fallen through the cracks. With that in mind, Musk decided to take the first step. He would help the mother and her children, not just with a handout, but by providing a safe and stable place to live, as well as the support they needed to rebuild their lives. He worked with his team to find a solution that would offer the family a permanent home, access to healthcare, and educational opportunities for her children. But as Musk began to formulate his plan, he realized that the problem was far bigger than just one family. The homelessness crisis was pervasive, affecting millions of people around the world. It wasn't just about providing temporary shelters or offering charity, it was about creating a system that could support people in need and help them reintegrate into society with dignity. Musk had the platform to influence change on a global scale, and he realized he couldn't ignore the responsibility that came with that. He began to envision a multifaceted initiative, one that combined housing, job training, mental health support, and financial literacy programs. He envisioned a network of sustainable, affordable homes that weren't just shelters, but communities where people could rebuild their lives. It would be a place where families like the homeless mothers could find not only a roof over their heads but also the resources they needed to thrive. Musk's plan wasn't without its challenges. The logistics of such an ambitious project were daunting, and he faced skepticism from many quarters. There were critics who questioned whether someone like him, with no experience in social work or public welfare, could truly make a difference. There were others who believed that his focus on technology would prevent him from understanding the complexities of human suffering. But Musk wasn't one to back down from a challenge. If anything, the doubts only fueled his determination. He knew the road ahead would be difficult. There would be setbacks, obstacles, and moments when it would seem like the task was too big to handle. But Musk had always thrived on adversity. It was in his nature to take on challenges that others believed were impossible, and now, he was determined to do the same for the homeless community. The mother's plea had started as a single cry for help, but it had sparked something much bigger within Musk. It had forced him to confront the reality of homelessness, something that had been so far removed from his world of technology and innovation. He understood now that real change didn't come from just looking at problems from a distance. It came from diving in, from getting involved, and from using his resources to tackle issues head-on. As Musk continued to refine his plans, he began to involve others, both within his network and outside of it. He reached out to experts in housing, urban planning, and mental health to ensure that his initiative would have a lasting, positive impact. He knew that creating a sustainable solution would require collaboration and input from a variety of fields, not just the tech world. But despite the challenges and doubts, Musk remained resolute. The success of his companies, his wealth, and his status meant little if they couldn't be used to help those who were struggling. This wasn't just a philanthropic effort, it was a chance to make a real, tangible difference. And Musk was ready to take on the responsibility. As he looked back at the mother and her children, who were now safely settled in a temporary housing unit, Musk felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was just the beginning. He hadn't solved the problem yet, but he had taken the first step. And that was all that mattered. The road ahead was long, and the work was far from finished, but Musk knew that he couldn't turn back now. He had made a promise to himself and to the mother. And now, he was determined to keep it. This was his chance to use his resources, his platform, and his influence to change lives. It wasn't about building rockets or electric cars, it was about building a future where no one had to face homelessness alone. The challenge was great, but so was the opportunity to make a difference. And Musk was ready to seize it. Musk's decision to act, to use his wealth and influence for something more meaningful than just his business ventures, began to create waves. At first, it was a small ripple, a quiet shift that only those closest to Musk could see. But soon, the ripple turned into something bigger. The media caught wind of Musk's commitment, and people began to take notice. The public, once skeptical of his intentions, started to rally behind him. And together they began to develop a comprehensive plan to combat homelessness. They worked tirelessly, gathering data, analyzing existing programs, and consulting with communities that had been affected by homelessness to ensure that their initiative would address real needs. The media, initially focused on the sensationalism of a billionaire helping a homeless mother, began to shift its tone. Stories emerged about how Musk's initiative was sparking conversations about homelessness on a global scale. Advocacy groups, nonprofits, and local governments began to reach out to Musk's team, eager to collaborate and find ways to make the initiative work in their own communities. The ripple effect was undeniable. What had started as one man's response to a mother's plea had grown into a global movement. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. The complexities of the issue became more apparent as Musk and his team began to dig deeper. There were questions about funding, policy, and how to create a model that could be replicated across the world. They had to navigate bureaucracy, red tape, and resistance from some corners of the public who were skeptical of the effectiveness of large-scale government interventions. Still, Musk pushed forward. He knew that the road ahead would be tough, but he also knew that every great movement had to start somewhere. If his initiative could change just a few lives, it would be worth it. And if it could change more than that, if it could help millions of families like the one he had met, then it would be a legacy worth fighting for. Meanwhile, the mother who had first reached out to Musk began to see her life change in ways she had never imagined. With Musk's support, she and her children were no longer living in shelters. They had found a permanent home in one of the newly developed affordable housing units. The children were enrolled in school, and she was given access to job training programs that helped her build the skills she needed to find stable employment. As her life began to stabilize, the mother found herself becoming an advocate for the very cause that had once seemed so distant to her. She shared her story publicly, speaking at events and becoming a symbol of the possibility that change was possible. Her journey, from homelessness to stability, was an inspiration to many, and she became a voice for the millions of families who were still struggling. Musk, seeing the success of this early pilot program, pushed even harder. He invested millions into expanding the initiative, working with local governments to create affordable housing, funding job training programs, and providing access to healthcare and mental health services for those who had been affected by homelessness. As the program expanded, Musk began to see results. More and more families were given the opportunity to rebuild their lives. The ripple effect continued to grow, reaching communities that had once been written off by society. People who had been homeless for years were now working, paying taxes, and contributing to their communities. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. The initiative also sparked conversations about the broader issues of poverty, inequality, and the importance of providing people with the tools they needed to succeed. Musk used his platform to speak out on these issues, calling for systemic changes in how governments and organizations approached homelessness. He pushed for policies that would address not just the symptoms of homelessness, but the root causes: poverty, mental illness, lack of affordable housing, and unemployment. The more people heard about the program, the more they began to take action. Donations poured in from individuals, organizations, and even other corporations that were inspired by Musk's leadership. It became clear that the world was ready for change. People were tired of hearing about homelessness without seeing solutions. They wanted to be part of something bigger, something that could truly make a difference. But Musk knew that it wasn't enough to rely on donations alone. He wanted to create a self-sustaining system that would allow the homeless to regain their independence and dignity. He worked with his team to create social enterprises, businesses that could provide employment opportunities for those transitioning out of homelessness, while also generating revenue to support the initiative. It was a model that blended compassion with sustainability, one that could be scaled globally. Musk's efforts were beginning to have a lasting impact, not just on the families involved, but on society as a whole. People were beginning to understand that homelessness was not just a problem for the government or for charity organizations to solve, it was a problem that affected everyone, and it required a collective effort to address it. As the ripple effect continued to spread, Musk began to reflect on how far he had come. What had started as a single, human interaction had grown into something that was changing the course of millions of lives. He had seen firsthand the power of empathy, the power of taking action in the face of injustice, and the power of working together to solve some of the world's most pressing issues. Musk realized that, in the end, the success of the initiative wasn't just about providing shelter or food, it was about restoring hope. It was about showing people that they mattered, that they had a future, and that they didn't have to face the world alone. And in that realization, Musk understood that this was his greatest achievement yet. Not the rockets, not the cars, but the difference he had made in the lives of those who had been forgotten. The momentum behind Musk's homelessness initiative was undeniable. What had started as a response to a single mother's plea had grown into a global movement, attracting attention from all over the world. As the initiative expanded, however, the challenges that came with it were becoming more apparent. It was one thing to inspire change, but another entirely to implement it on such a large scale. Musk, though determined, quickly learned that this would be a far more difficult battle than he had anticipated. One of the first major obstacles was the backlash from skeptics. Despite the growing success of the program, there were plenty of critics who believed that Musk's involvement in social issues was little more than a publicity stunt. Some accused him of trying to position himself as a savior, using homelessness as a means to improve his own public image. The media, while initially positive, began to focus on the scrutiny surrounding the initiative. They questioned whether Musk's wealth was truly being used in the most effective way or if his focus on global innovation was distracting him from solving the real issues at hand. Musk had faced criticism before. He had grown accustomed to the press being both fascinated and critical of his every move. But this felt different. The criticism wasn't just about his business ventures, it was about his personal character and the effectiveness of the movement he was leading. Was he truly doing enough to address the root causes of homelessness, or was he simply throwing money at the problem without understanding it fully? Musk spent many sleepless nights questioning whether he had underestimated the scale of the issue. While the program had made an impact, he knew that his initiative wasn't perfect. There were still people slipping through the cracks, still families who weren't being reached. The housing solutions Musk had created were great for some, but they weren't a long-term fix for everyone. And then, there was the systemic issue, lack of mental health support, job opportunities, and the stigma surrounding homelessness. As if the external criticisms weren't enough, Musk began to face challenges from within his own organization. Some of his advisors, who had initially supported his philanthropic efforts, started to question whether the amount of resources being funneled into this initiative was sustainable in the long run. They worried that Musk's focus on homelessness might divert attention from the work he had started with his tech companies, companies that had the potential to change the world in ways that could help millions, too. They pushed him to reconsider how much time and money he was investing in this side project. Musk, however, wasn't swayed. He had made a promise, to the homeless mother and to himself, that he would do everything in his power to make a difference. The doubts didn't diminish his resolve, instead, they strengthened his commitment. He knew he was tackling something that couldn't be fixed overnight, and he was ready to face whatever obstacles lay ahead. But this wasn't just a matter of money or resources. It was about societal change. Musk had always believed that technology could be a force for good, but now he saw that true transformation required not just innovation, but empathy and human connection. The resistance he faced reminded him that the solution wasn't as simple as applying business strategies to social issues. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with a sleek product or a clever business model. Musk found himself needing to get even more involved, to better understand the root causes of homelessness. He started visiting shelters, speaking to social workers, meeting with people who had experienced homelessness firsthand. He had initially assumed that by simply providing housing, he could make a difference, but the reality was much more complicated. People didn't just need a place to live, they needed help with mental health, with employment, with rebuilding relationships. Homelessness was about much more than just the lack of a roof over someone's head. It was a complex web of social, psychological, and economic factors that couldn't be untangled with just a financial investment. As Musk delved deeper into the issue, he began to adjust his approach. He increased funding for mental health services and job training programs, recognizing that people needed more than just shelter, they needed support systems that could help them rebuild their lives from the inside out. He also began advocating for policies that would address the root causes of homelessness, including affordable housing and better access to healthcare. Despite these changes, the challenges persisted. There were still many families who hadn't been reached, still too many people living on the streets. Musk knew that the work was far from over. But with each new hurdle, he became more determined. He wasn't going to let the setback stop him from continuing the fight for change. The criticism, the resistance, and the obstacles only fueled his drive to push forward and find solutions that were lasting, not just temporary. As the months went by, the initiative slowly began to shift from a simple charity project into a broader social movement. People from all walks of life, government officials, business leaders, and ordinary citizens, began to get involved. Musk's efforts started to spark conversations about homelessness on a larger scale, calling attention to the systemic issues that had long been ignored. It was a slow process, but change was beginning to take root. Through the many challenges, Musk began to understand something deeper. Real change didn't come from just doing what was easy. It came from stepping into the discomfort, facing the complexities head-on, and pushing through despite the resistance. It wasn't about finding the perfect solution, it was about continually striving to make a difference. The road ahead was still long. Musk knew there were many more battles to fight and many more lives to touch. But the journey had taught him a valuable lesson, that the most important battles in life are often the hardest, and the greatest victories come not from personal achievement, but from lifting others up. As he looked back at all he had accomplished so far, Musk knew that this wasn't the end of the journey, it was just the beginning. As Musk's homelessness initiative continued to evolve, the real transformation was starting to take shape, not just for the homeless families, but for Musk himself. The deeper he got into the work, the more he realized how profoundly it was affecting his own perspective on life, business, and the role he could play in society. The challenge had become more than just a philanthropic project. It had become a personal journey, one that had reshaped his understanding of success and his purpose. The mother and her children, whom Musk had helped so directly, were beginning to thrive in ways that no one could have predicted. They had moved into one of the new affordable housing units that Musk's initiative had provided, and their lives were slowly but steadily improving. The children were in school, doing well in their classes, and the mother, after receiving job training, had managed to secure stable employment in a local community center. But the transformation wasn't just in their circumstances, it was in their outlook. The mother had once been a woman weighed down by hopelessness, living in constant fear of the next day. Now, she had a renewed sense of purpose. She had found stability for her children, and she was able to look forward to the future with optimism, something she hadn't felt in years. Musk visited them regularly, seeing firsthand the positive effects of the program. What was once a family living on the streets was now a family with dignity and purpose. Musk knew that this success, while deeply fulfilling, was just one example of how his initiative could change lives on a larger scale. If it worked for this family, why couldn't it work for thousands, or even millions, of others? The initiative's growth and the stories of families like the mother's were starting to ripple out. The media, which had once been critical of Musk's involvement, now began to shift its narrative. They spoke of his commitment to not just provide temporary solutions, but long-term opportunities. His project wasn't just about giving a home, it was about giving people the resources to rebuild their lives. Stories of success from the initiative flooded the news, showing how homelessness was not a fate people had to accept, but a challenge that could be overcome with the right kind of support. Musk had always believed in the power of innovation to change the world, but he was beginning to see that some of the most powerful changes weren't technological, they were human. Helping a family rise from the ashes of homelessness wasn't something that could be measured with rockets or electric cars. It was something far more profound. It was about the connection between people, about giving them the tools to succeed on their own terms. As he continued to visit more families, Musk was struck by how many of them shared the same story. They were hardworking, resilient people who had simply fallen on hard times. They weren't looking for handouts, they were looking for a chance. Musk saw that many of the families who had been helped through the initiative had not only found housing but had also rediscovered their self-worth. They were no longer defined by their homelessness, they were defined by their determination to succeed. Musk's own transformation wasn't just about the impact he was having on others, it was about how deeply he had changed as a person. As a man who had always been driven by ambition, by the next big project or technological breakthrough, he had never really understood the emotional and human side of success. But now, seeing the difference his initiative was making, he realized that true success wasn't about being at the top of the corporate ladder, it was about lifting others up. It was about creating something that had a lasting impact, something that could change the trajectory of people's lives. One afternoon, Musk found himself sitting in a conference room with a group of his closest advisors, all discussing the future of the initiative. They were looking at the data, at the programs that were showing real success, and the plans for expanding the initiative across the country and beyond. But despite the positive statistics and the growing support from other communities, Musk felt a sense of urgency. He knew that the success of this project, while promising, was still fragile. There were still so many people out there who needed help, so many families who hadn't yet been reached. And even though things were improving, Musk knew that this wasn't a problem that could be solved in a few years, it was a decades-long challenge. "I don't think we can stop here," Musk said, his voice steady but firm. "This isn't something that ends once we've provided shelter for a few families. We need to keep pushing, to keep innovating, and to keep scaling this initiative to reach as many people as possible. We have to change the way society looks at homelessness, not just provide short-term fixes." His team nodded, understanding the magnitude of what he was saying. This was no longer just a social project, it had become a movement, a mission that Musk had fully committed to. They weren't just helping people survive, they were helping them thrive. And Musk had realized that the real goal wasn't just about providing homes, it was about providing hope, about creating an environment where people could rebuild their lives. As the initiative expanded, Musk found that it was no longer just his vision, it was a collective effort. Volunteers, social workers, non-profit organizations, and even other businesses began to lend their support. People who had once been skeptical of Musk's involvement in social causes now saw the real difference he was making. He wasn't just another billionaire trying to make himself look good. He was someone who was willing to roll up his sleeves, listen to the real stories of those in need, and do the work required to make a tangible change. And in the process, Musk began to see a side of humanity that he had never fully appreciated. The strength and resilience of the people he met, people who had faced unimaginable hardships and yet continued to fight, became a source of inspiration for him. It was a reminder that the greatest innovations weren't always the ones that came from technology. Sometimes, the greatest innovations came from people coming together to help each other. As he stood in front of a new housing unit, looking out at the families who had found their new home, Musk realized that he had become a part of something much bigger than himself. And for the first time in his life, he felt like he was truly making a difference, one family at a time. The transformation was real. Not just in the lives of the families he had helped, but in his own heart. Musk had started this journey thinking he could solve a problem with his resources and innovation. But what he had learned was that true transformation came not just from throwing money at a problem, but from connecting with people, understanding their struggles, and working together to create something lasting. As the months went by, the homelessness initiative grew beyond Musk's expectations. What had begun as a response to a single mother's plea had morphed into a full-fledged social movement, touching lives and reshaping communities. The impact was profound, not just for the families who had been helped, but for Musk himself. What he had initially viewed as a temporary project to address a crisis had slowly, almost imperceptibly, become a defining part of his own personal journey. Musk, known to the world as an entrepreneur driven by ambitious technological dreams, had spent his life pushing the boundaries of what humanity could achieve. His focus had always been on the big picture. The creation of electric cars, space exploration, and artificial intelligence. But the deeper he got into this initiative, the more he began to understand that real change didn't always come from rockets and software. It came from people, everyday people, struggling but resilient, who, when given a chance, could change the course of their own lives. As he watched more and more families transition from homelessness to stability, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. He had helped to create something real, something that had restored dignity to people who had been abandoned by society. The program wasn't just providing homes, it was providing hope. And Musk, once focused on futuristic technologies, now realized that the future he cared about wasn't just one in space, but one that also included the lives of the people on Earth. The mother whose story had first moved him had become a symbol of this transformation. She had once been lost, struggling to make ends meet for her children, but now she was a role model for others. Through Musk's initiative, she had found a stable home, a job, and a sense of purpose. She had become an advocate for homelessness, sharing her story to inspire others who were facing similar challenges. Seeing the change in her, and in so many others, Musk found that his vision had shifted. He realized that his wealth and influence were tools that he could use for far more than just his own success. They were instruments for change, a means to address the social issues that he had been blind to for so long. The work he was doing had become an integral part of his identity. It wasn't just about launching rockets into space or building cars, it was about creating systems that could truly make a difference in people's lives. But the transformation was not without its struggles. Musk still faced resistance, both from outside critics and from within his own company. There were moments when the burden of it all seemed overwhelming. The initiative wasn't perfect, there were still gaps to fill, issues to address, and families who hadn't been reached. The media continued to question the sustainability of his efforts, wondering if this was just another phase for Musk or if he was truly committed to the long haul. Yet, with every challenge, Musk's resolve only grew stronger. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. Homelessness was a complex issue, deeply intertwined with poverty, mental illness, lack of affordable housing, and social inequities. There were no quick fixes. But as Musk continued to meet with the families who had been helped, as he listened to their stories of struggle and hope, he felt a growing sense of purpose. This wasn't just an initiative, it was a movement. And it was his responsibility to keep it moving forward. In the quiet moments, when the world was still, Musk reflected on the profound changes that had happened within him. He had spent so much of his life pursuing personal achievements, building companies, breaking barriers, exploring new frontiers. But now, he was beginning to understand that the greatest frontier of all was the human spirit. The connection between people, the willingness to listen and understand one another, was more powerful than any technological innovation. His thoughts often returned to the homeless mother. What would have happened if he hadn't stopped to listen to her that day? What if he had just walked past her, assuming that someone else would help? He realized that it was that simple act of stopping, of truly hearing her, that had set everything into motion. It had changed not only her life but also his. Musk had always been driven by a desire to change the world, but now he understood that true change didn't just come from building things, it came from breaking down the walls that separated people. It came from understanding that no one should ever feel invisible, that every person had value, and that sometimes, all it took was a little kindness to turn a life around. As he looked ahead, Musk knew there was still so much more to be done. His initiative had made strides, but the work wasn't over. He needed to push harder, innovate more, and involve even more people in the mission. Homelessness was a global issue, one that needed a solution that spanned across nations, cultures, and societies. Musk knew he had the power to inspire change, but he also knew it was a collective effort, one that would require the support of governments, businesses, and individuals alike. But for the first time in his life, Musk felt like he had found his true calling. It wasn't just about space travel or electric cars anymore. It was about creating a world where people cared for one another, where kindness and empathy were at the core of everything. It was about using his platform to elevate the voices of those who had been silenced for too long. Musk's commitment to the homeless initiative wasn't just about fixing a problem, it was about changing the way the world viewed poverty and inequality. He wanted to leave a legacy, not just of technological innovation, but of compassion, empathy, and real human connection. The work wasn't easy, but Musk was no stranger to difficult challenges. This was a fight worth fighting. And as the initiative continued to grow, Musk felt a sense of peace settle over him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be, facing the hardest challenges, but knowing that through it all, he was making a real difference. You said. The initiative had transformed the lives of countless families, but the greatest transformation had been within Elon Musk himself. As the homelessness program expanded, Musk found himself not only leading an effort to provide shelter and opportunities but also undergoing a profound personal change. What started as a response to a single, urgent plea had become something far bigger, a movement that was reshaping his understanding of success and his role in the world. Musk, who had always measured success by the metrics of wealth, innovation, and global influence, now realized that the true measure of success lay in the impact one had on others. He had spent years focusing on building products and technologies that could change the world, but now he saw that the most meaningful changes were the ones that affected human lives directly. The work he was doing now, helping to address homelessness, providing hope to those who had none, felt more fulfilling than anything he had ever done before. It wasn't just about making life more comfortable, it was about making life possible again for those who had been forgotten by society. As the initiative grew, Musk watched as families like the mothers, whom he had helped, began to rebuild their lives. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. The children who had once known nothing but instability were now excelling in school. Parents who had once been plagued by shame and fear now stood tall, proud of their progress. And those who had once been seen as a burden were now contributing to their communities, working, paying taxes, and helping to strengthen the fabric of society. The stories of these families were not just statistics, they were testaments to the power of kindness, the power of action, and the power of community. Musk knew that his wealth and influence had helped to open doors for them, but it was their resilience and determination that had ultimately allowed them to overcome their struggles. The real work had come from them, from their willingness to rise above their circumstances and fight for a better life. Musk had only been the catalyst. He thought back to the first time he had met the homeless mother, the way her eyes had looked into his, desperate yet hopeful. He had never imagined that this simple, human encounter would be the spark for something so profound. It had pushed him to confront the things he had taken for granted, the comfort of his wealth, the stability of his life, and to ask himself what it truly meant to make a difference. Musk had learned that real change didn't come from simply writing a check or launching a campaign. It came from understanding the issue on a personal level, from listening to people, and from being willing to get involved. It came from empathy, from seeing the humanity in others, and from using one's position of privilege to give them the tools they needed to succeed. It wasn't about charity, it was about justice. It was about ensuring that everyone, no matter their circumstances, had the opportunity to live a life of dignity. He had learned that the greatest innovations weren't always technological. They were the innovations that touched the heart, that healed wounds and brought people together. Helping someone rebuild their life was as revolutionary as building a rocket, and in many ways, it was far more rewarding. Musk had once thought that his legacy would be defined by his ventures into space, by the cars he helped make more sustainable, and by the technologies he introduced. But now, he knew that his true legacy would be defined by how he used his resources to help others and by how his actions changed the lives of those who needed it most. As the homelessness initiative continued to spread across the globe, Musk's work was far from over. There were still millions of people who needed help, and the fight against homelessness was a long one. But Musk knew that the lessons he had learned over the past months would guide him through the challenges ahead. He had seen firsthand how one person's actions could spark a movement, how a single moment of kindness could ripple out and change the world. And he knew that this wasn't just about providing a roof over someone's head, it was about changing the way the world looked at homelessness, about treating people not as problems to be solved, but as individuals with potential, dignity, and worth. Musk's perspective had shifted. He had begun to see success in a different light. It wasn't about how many cars Tesla sold or how many rockets SpaceX launched, it was about how many people he could help, how many lives he could touch, and how much love, hope, and support he could bring to those who needed it most. And for the first time, Musk felt like he was truly doing something that mattered, something that would leave a lasting impact on the world. The lesson was clear: true success isn't measured by how much you achieve, it's measured by how much you help others achieve. The world's problems may seem insurmountable, but Musk had learned that every step toward change, every hand extended, every opportunity given, was a victory in itself. And as he looked out at the families whose lives had been changed, he knew that this was only the beginning. There was so much more to do, so many more people to help, and so much more to learn. But with each person he helped, with each life he touched, Musk had come to understand that the most profound impact he could make was not through technology or innovation, it was through human connection, empathy, and the willingness to make a difference. The world had changed him, and now, he was changing the world. And for that, he would forever be grateful.